angle as well. We thought about it.
All
right. Well, let's. We're going to go ahead and get started. It's right about 1 o'clock on the dot. Thank you all, first and foremost. Many of you came very early, and you've been sitting here just listening to the two of us go back and forth and chat. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day and time out of the con to come down and check out what we're doing. We are BWT Games. BWT Games is made up of myself, Evan Arnold.
My name is Josh Main.
And my wife, Emily, who's in the back dressed as Brittany. She's our designated videographer today, and she decided not to participate in the talk. So if you have questions about the artwork that she did for the game, we can certainly redirect those and work with that. And really, the goal of this panel, the title of the panel was Anyone Can Make a Game. And I got a question earlier, are we going to teach you how to make games? And in 40 minutes, 50 minutes, that's roughly impossible. There's a lot that goes into making a game. This microphone is really hot, sorry about that. There's a lot that goes into making a game. There's many different elements. You have to have a little bit of a knowledge of programming and logic. Those are things that honestly, neither of us really understood before we went into this undertaking. And there are an enormous amount of resources out there. So if in any way we inspire you to follow your dream and make a game, we're happy to answer questions about the resources that we used, but also just honestly, Google. Just go to Google, look up what resources are out there, and I'm certain you can find something that works for you. Also, alongside with that, the big part of Anyone Can Make a Game is that this is a very low production value game. We didn't invest a whole lot of money into making this. This was really done with equipment that we already had, knowledge that we already had, and knowledge that we gained through watching YouTube videos and learning from other people. And it was really a project of love that the three of us worked together for the past year to make this a reality. We are planning on releasing this game, so the goal originally was November. Part of the goal with this panel is to allow some of you to try it if you're interested in. Get some feedback if you have any feedback for us. We've had some folks testing it already, and the feedback's been pretty positive. We've had some good input on it, but I'd like to hear from you as to what you think and where you're interested. So, starting a little bit with our background, I told you neither of us has a background in making games. Josh and I met each other in 1989. I was 7 years old. Josh was 5 years old. Josh was playing in a mud puddle with a stick. And I introduced myself, and we became lifelong friends.
That's pretty much it.
Where the video games come into play is that my father, back around that time, worked for Kodak as a senior systems analyst. So he was working in C programming and SAP, Oracle, if you guys are familiar with that type of application. And as a result, I was probably the only kid on the block that had a computer. I had a Tandy 1000, which was a Radio Shack brand computer that had the old floppy disk. That when you think of a floppy disk, some of you may not even know what a floppy disk is because you only know what a flash drive is. Well, floppy disks used to be, there was a 5.2 floppy and a 3.5 floppy. The computer that I had was the 5.2. That was a real floppy disk that you could actually shake and hear it.
Oregon Trail era.
Not even Oregon Trail. Yeah, this was a little low tech. So back in that day, there weren't a lot of options if you wanted to play a lot of games. There were consoles, so a lot of my friends had Nintendo Entertainment System. My parents never bought me an NES when I was a little kid, so I had a PC and I had the Tandy 1000. So if I wanted to play a new game, it meant taking one of the shareware games that my father had on some of these discs that we would get in the mail and subscription services, finding a way to get into the code of that game and change the game to become something that I wanted it to be. So when I was about maybe 8 or 9 years old, I was learning basic programming, literally basic programming in BASIC, in order just to keep myself entertained. I love seeing things move on the screen, and it really excited me when I was able to get into the code and make a change. So that was really my story and how I got introduced to this. And there is a point that our paths crossed, and it's with a particular title that I know we both love.
And it's still a title that I am still so much in love with today. I'm sure everybody here has heard of Doom. Yeah. Right? Doom was fantastic in that, you know, when we were 12, 13 years old, that was right up our alley at that age for, you know, who we were and whatnot. But it was also very friendly as far as level editing, modding, so on and so forth. And at one Christmas, an uncle of mine had gotten me a book that I swear is the thickest book I own. It was called Secrets of the Doom Gurus. And it came with a CD that had hundreds, I feel like, hundreds of third-party software from different, you know, independent developers on making what were called WADs. You know, Doom WADs stood for Where's All the Data? And I swear 80% of those applications crashed. And the first experience of us finding a map editor that was stable enough for us to use, we realized there's something like to this. We're now making something that, while we didn't make the engine of the game ourselves, the level design, which when you're a 13, 12, 14-year-old kid, is really all that matters. Is this fun to play? Does it look cool? Can you deathmatch in it and all of that? And once we started getting our hands into Doom, I think we both had a bit of a fire lit inside of us that someday we're going to do something and make our own game.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that is that the process that we used back in the early 90s to make these Doom levels really isn't that different than the process that we used to make the game that we're going to show you guys today. Back then, though, it was dial-up modems, calling each other's houses, trying to connect to test levels to see if anything was broken. So sometimes his mother would answer the phone and it would be, "Josh, it's for you!" Sorry to give your mom that voice, but you know, screaming down the stairs. And that was the only way that we could test to make sure that things weren't broken and things weren't going to, you know, fail the instant we connected. And in making a game, if you've never done that before, I'll tell you that 99% of what you're doing, especially if you're coming from a background like ours where you don't have a lot of experience with games, 99% is trial and error. You launch the game, it crashes. You try to figure out why it crashed. You go back and make changes, crashes again. And it requires a lot of patience, and it really requires a lot of you have to have that fire, you have to have that desire to really see this to the end. With the game that we created that we're demoing today, we actually originally conceived of this, and you'll hear this in the video we're going to share, 7 years ago. We had just been discussing the possibility of going back to those Doom days and making levels and building things, and we just kind of decided, why don't we try to make our own game? And it came from really just kind of a crazy conversation where we were throwing everything on the table. We weren't thinking of our limitations. And honestly, that's the first mistake that a lot of people might make, is starting off trying to limit yourself at what you can do. But also, we tried to make something that we would both enjoy. We're both old school gamers, and I thought this convention, we'd be with our peers. We're not that into like the new shooters and Call of Duty and things like that. I play some new games, you play some new games, you both play on PC, but the real passion for us are those old style games. And I feel wholeheartedly that that genre of arcade games, side-scrolling games, all of those genres that existed that somehow died in the 2000s and starting to come back a little bit, but I don't think they've been fully explored. I think there's a lot of things you can do that hadn't been done. So really where we started with this is that we talked about making a game that would work conceptually on any platform, all the way back to the Atari 2600. We wanted to make sure that the basic mechanics of this game, not necessarily the graphics and the sounds and all that, we wanted to make sure that sorry about that.
You want me to turn it down?
That's fine. I'll just blow out your ears. But so we wanted to make sure that the design of the game was something that was translatable, reverse translatable with older setups and older systems, because really that's a very simple way to come up with a new design or a different design. You just turn me way down. Good enough? All right. It's a simple way to try to challenge yourself to come up with a new design of something that really nobody's ever seen before. So the design of the game, and you're going to see this when we get to the gameplay. So at this point, we've been talking about 15 minutes. I have a short video. We couldn't bring all of the equipment that we used to make the game, but that was a big part of what we wanted to share with you. Like I said earlier, this was really done in the cheapest way possible. We didn't want to invest a lot of money because it's not something that we do for a living. And I think for many of you that might have thought of making a game, that's probably a consideration that you make is, it's too expensive. It's too expensive to publish. It's too expensive to buy the equipment.
Yeah, it's too time consuming.
Too time consuming, right. So we'll share the video with you just to give you a quick tour of the equipment and where we did this and how we built the game. And then we'll take a quick Q&A.
BWT.
BWT Games.
Oh, hi there. This is Evan from BWT Games. I'm just sitting downstairs in our development studio, getting ready to play a game of BFender. Well, I guess it's a good time as any to give you a tour of BWT Studios. Well, we're off here in Rochester, New York, and BWT Games is made up of myself, Evan Arnold, my wife Emily, and my good friend Josh Main. Emily and Josh couldn't be here for the video, but I'm more than happy to give you a quick tour of the studio and let you know what we used to make the game. Well, to start, the computer that I'm playing on here is a Lenovo desktop. This is an off-the-shelf desktop that I got, I think, at a Black Friday sale at Best Buy. Very inexpensive, all starter equipment. Nothing's really been changed inside. It's still the original guts. And this was really the primary computer that we used in order to make BFender. This has been a long, long project. It's taken us about a year to get to the point where we are today. And I have to say that this Lenovo, one of the main reasons that we used it for development was so that we would have a very basic computer to test things on. We wanted to make sure that this game, really being a basic arcade game, would be something that would run on almost any hardware setup or any device that anyone has. And the other convenient part of having this computer down here was that we also happen to have a bar right over here, which I'll take you to just for a moment. This was the bar where all of the ideas for BFender were generated. When we get a chance to demonstrate the game and you get to see the full game, you'll see that there were a lot of ideas that were probably brought up around this type of a setting. One of the main reasons that we decided to do a lot of the talking away from the computer and away from the television screen was because we wanted to make sure that all the ideas were built completely raw from scratch without the development really in mind. If we had an idea, we could sit down and test it. If we had a sound that we wanted to record, we could sit down and record it. But really, we tried to remove ourselves as much as possible from that setting while still remaining accessible so that we could think of the game in really the most free way possible. We did a lot of our drawings just on a paper notepad here on the bar. We did some up on the chalkboard that you see behind me. And really just kind of tossed around ideas, just the three of us, my wife and Josh and I. And we came up with a lot of interesting ideas that I think you're going to enjoy, and a lot of things that you may not notice initially when you play the game, but you will find out the more that you play it and the further that you get. So good luck at finding all the hidden things that are in BFender. But let me take you upstairs and I'll show you a few other things that were used during the development of BFender. And if you haven't noticed yet, this studio tour is really just a tour of my home. This is where we live, so it served a double purpose for all the communications, conversations, and everything that eventually led to BFender. And it all started right here in my kitchen. One day, Josh came over, and we were having dinner, I believe, as a family, with his family as well. And we just started tossing out ideas and coming up with ideas for a game. This was about 7 years ago. And we had pitched this idea. B-Fender was an arcade game, arcade-style game. It was supposed to be very simple. And believe it or not, a lot of the things that were originally discussed around this kitchen table, probably over a couple of beers, ended up in the game 7 years later. So it was a very, very crazy timeline, very crazy thing. Well, the other thing that happened at this kitchen table was all of the music recording. All of the sounds and all of the music that are in B-Fender were recorded using my son's iPad. This is an iPad 2, using a Griffin recording studio. So this is just a simple device that connects to the iPad and connects to the guitar. It's got a standard music jack in the back of it. It allowed me to use GarageBand, which is an application for iPad, to record all of the music. And you'll see here that I have different stages outlined. So I have part 2, part 3, part 1, stage 1. I have the BWT Games opening. This is the original recording. And all of that was just recorded using an iPad and just using this station with different combinations of instruments, as well as some of the built-in instruments that are in GarageBand. I'll take you over here as well to show you the instruments that were used to record B-Fender. Really cheap stuff. I haven't played a guitar for a very long time, so it was a lot of reintroduction for me to the world of recording music and writing music. So I used a Yamaha Pacifica guitar, electric guitar, and a Fender Prophecy 2 bass. That's the Prophecy 1 actually, so it's preceded the Prophecy 2. But just a simple bass, simple guitar, and those were the two instruments that were used to record all the music. My wife did all the artwork, Emily. And this is her station over here. It's another Lenovo. You can see that we're brand loyalty here. This is a Lenovo IdeaPad Y700, another off-the-shelf computer that has Adobe Creative Suite 4. That's a discontinued Creative Suite software set that my wife obtained while she was in the school for graphic design. And she designed all of the artwork. We worked together, all three of us, to discuss really what style we wanted, what we wanted to be on screen, the different objects that needed to be created so that we could interact with them and make changes within the coding environment. And Emily drew everything by hand from scratch, pixel by pixel, using Adobe Creative Suite, as well using just a simple pen and touchpad setup that she has over here. So that was the station where all the artwork was created. And finally, in the last stop in BWT Studios, is the mother of all computers that I have in my home. So downstairs I have the basic computer. Upstairs I have the much more effective computer. This was a computer that I put together myself, and honestly it matches the exact setup almost to a T that Josh has back at his home. So that was nice that we could build on two machines and test on two machines that were almost exactly the same, going back and forth and sending each other files to do tests and see updates and things like that. We weren't always able to get together. We did as much as possible and worked around the barn, worked downstairs as much as we could, but a lot of it was done back and forth. And you'll see this is the Google Drive that we used to send and receive email, or send and receive files and email communications. All through Google. This is a free service. It's just kind of a drag and drop file service that's secure and that we all shared with each other. My wife was uploading all of the sprites and backgrounds into here, and then we would update version by version, updating each version number in Google Drive, and message each other when we were ready to test. We also used a couple other applications when we weren't together. In order to communicate, we used JoinMe. Join.me is a free service for web conferencing that we used, as well as Discord, which is a voice service. If you play online games on PC, you're probably familiar with Discord. And finally, GameMaker Studio. GameMaker Studio 2 was the primary tool that we used to build and code. We started in the GameMaker Studio 1, and we actually had to translate all of that into GameMaker Studio 2. Thankfully, they made it very, very easy. This is just one of many different coding environments that you can make games in. We chose this one because of its simplicity, and some of the cost elements came into play. But you can see that we have version by version over here under my recent projects, what we've been working on and what we put into the game. So with that, I guess that's it. That's really all we have in BWT Studios. This is where all of it happened. We built everything here. It was, again, it took about a year to build that entire game, and we're looking forward to releasing it to all of you. Thank you so much for joining me on this tour, a brief tour of my home and a brief tour of the studio that we used to develop. I love calling it a studio, even though it's just my house. It elevates things a little bit, but this has been great. Thank you so much, and take care.
Right. So, as you guys
my shirt? Oh, thank you. That's actually a Buzz Aldrin's shirt. Buzz Aldrin wants to get us to Mars.
Yes,
I think Buzz might already be on Mars, but
pretty close.
We met him once, and I got that shirt.
So, I mean, as you guys can see, there's a very good possibility that you already have the tools to, if not to complete a game, then to get started, because there is a lot that's involved. The sound work, graphic design, so on and so forth. Sometimes it's right under your nose and you don't really think about it. Like you pointed out, audio recordings on not just an iPad, because what are we on today? iPad X, we're on like the 10th generation. That's an iPad 2. It took a long time for that thing to boot up and for us to get this thing to start recording on. But the other point is that if you've thought about making a game, development studios like GameMaker Studio 2 are just, as he said in the video, they're one of literally dozens. And even 7 years ago, when we first conceptualized this game, we first sat down and tried to take a look into
Visual
Studio, yeah. And it was just, I mean, it was difficult. And it's not, again, not having a background in any of this, it became a little overwhelming. And when we decided to, you know, let's re-explore and see where we're at today, GameMaker Studio unquestionably hopped out first. But it's just one of dozens of very, very simple, easy-to-use development environments to make games such as these things.
Right, and I think that's an important point too, because the main reason we had talked about that gap of 7 years from when we originally conceived it and then when we came back to it and completed the game, it was discouraging when we got started and we were working in Visual Studio, because having absolutely no background in programming, it can be, it's a bear. It's very overwhelming. There's a lot of thought processes that go on while you're building that, and we kind of got to the point that we could maybe need to be on screen, and then it just kind of died for a little while. But we came back to it. We did a lot of research years later, because this idea just never died. We kept talking about it and it kept evolving, and it came to the point that, you know, we just really got to do this. So what we did is we looked up for other people that were like us, that didn't have a lot of experience, to find the tools that they were using. And that's where GameMaker Studio really came for us. And this is not a free advertising for GameMaker Studio. I'm going to send them a bill. But I will say that it's a very strong tool, and it's strong from the sense that if you have a very, very basic entry level in programming knowledge, you can build a game simply by dragging and dropping, like you can build a sprite, drop it on screen. That's not how we did it. We did it through coding. It was line by line by line, but the nice thing about GameMaker Studio, I don't know if you could really see it in the video, we might pull it up later if we have time, but it's broken down into like a tree system, so you can expand and collapse different items, so everything is easily organized, and no matter how big the game is, we could always keep everything kind of in line and find things very quickly if we needed to make a change. We also learned as we were developing the game that there are many, many, many different ways to do the same darn thing in a game. 98%, I'm going to go with the 98 to 99, is smoke and mirrors in video games. What you think is happening on the screen is most of the time not what's happening in the background of the programming. There are a lot of tricks that are used. There are a lot of ways that developers will create an outcome simply by doing something in a different way. And I think I know the same thing Josh was going to say, so I'll put this out there if you want to add to it. But one example that you'll see in the game that we were struggling with was we wanted the game to fade in and fade out. Am I on the right track here?
No, but this is a good point.
It's a good point. All right, good. So we wanted the game to fade in and fade out, and we were knocking our heads against the wall, trying to figure out how can we, draw it so that it goes black and then it comes back and fades into the new screen. And we were looking at all these documents, and some of these people out there are geniuses, and they did it in ways that we couldn't even conceive how it was being done. So then we said, you know what, has anybody ever heard of the KISS method? The keep it simple, stupid? Just kind of knock ourselves in the head. Right, exactly. So we were like, we're overcomplicating this. We keep it simple, stupid. What we're going to do is we're just going to draw a black box and just put the black box behind the screen and call in the black box to cover the screen and then call it back out. So instead of trying to work with all the objects that were on screen to fade each and every object out, we just covered the whole darn thing with a black box, and you couldn't tell the difference if you didn't know that's what we did. There's a lot of examples like that in the game where we ran into an impasse, and what I'll say is there's no such thing as an impasse. Never give up, because there are always different ways to do the same type of thing.
Yeah, and to his point about how a lot of it is smoke and mirrors, once you start to, when you understand that and you start to think that way, the ideas start to flow a little bit more, because you understand that, maybe the quickest path to getting what we want to get on the screen is not directly from A to B. It's, as he said, kind of giving the illusion of fading things in and out by drawing something extra on screen. And again, once you get into that mindset, once you realize that this isn't all that it seems, it becomes a little bit easier to get your ideas on screen the way that you pictured them originally.
Right. So at this point, we're gonna demo the game. We've been talking a lot about it, and hopefully you guys are interested in seeing it. Hopefully we don't underwhelm anyone with our...
Yes.
Remember, we are not experts, but we like the game.
And as he said, we are both full-time employees at non-game-making type jobs.
Right. So before that, though, does anyone have any questions that you'd like to ask before we see the game?
Did any of you ever bother, try to get your certification in C++?
Oh, that's an excellent question, because I did 2 years in college in programming. And I quit that as fast as I could because on year 2, I was like, what the heck? I just want to party. I don't want to sit here and read these lines of code. I thought I was losing my vision. And it really just came to the point, growing up with a father that was a systems analyst and worked in those type of environments, I always thought that's what I'm going to do when I grow up. I'm going to be like Dad. Well, no, things evolved quite a bit since my dad went to school in the 70s, and it was very, very intense. So I did try, but I failed miserably, and I will say that was one of the times in my life that I, quit something and gave up on it. But thankfully, and that would have been in 2001 that I quit the programming class. Things have come a long, long way since then, and things have gotten a lot easier. So coming back into it now, even with that basic knowledge, it's not nearly as intimidating as it used to be. You've had a question for them? Yeah.
Do you make Five Nights at Freddy's?
I'm sorry?
You make Five Nights at Freddy's?
Five Nights at Freddy's?
Can we make Five Nights?
Could we make Five Nights at Freddy's? From a conceptual basis, absolutely. Meaning that you could make a game. Five Nights at Freddy's is actually a very simple concept. If anybody's not familiar with Five Nights at Freddy's, I'd be surprised. But it's just clicking through different cameras and seeing different things on screen, and then kind of track something through a building and you find it. It was a terrible description of Five Nights at Freddy's, go look it up. But from a conceptual basis, that's not very difficult to do. What the person that made that game, names escape me in the moment, Scott, yeah, call him Scott, he's not here. The artwork is obviously at a very high level. There's a lot that's in the game that's above where we could build something. Could we build a simple game that does the same thing?
Yeah. I think the short answer to a question like that, when you're talking about making a game, is yes. Because if you can learn the functions that are required to get what it is that you're thinking of on screen, if you can learn all of that and you can type it out and get it to work, then absolutely you can. Can we? Sure, but it would probably take us a lot longer than it took us to make Defender. That's the beauty of video games, is that if you can think of it, the answer is always going to be yes. Can it be done? Yes, it can. Can the hardware support it? No, that's a different story.
Well, one thing I would challenge you to do, though, is to try to make something different.
Good point.
Copying other people's games or doing a core game or a different game, I don't think that that's as challenging as trying to take a different concept as inspiration and make something different out of it. I also think that in general, games that are replications of other games don't perform as well and aren't as potentially lucrative. Not that we're going to make a penny on it.
Yeah, we will definitely lose money.
But always challenge yourself to think differently. Yes.
Did you teach yourself in graphic design?
My wife did all the graphics, and yes, I taught her. No, she went to school for graphic design, but so you have an associate's in graphic design? Right. So she got an application, which was Adobe Creative Suite, from school, so we didn't actually pay for that. And it was a simple drawing application. Could you build your own graphics in GameMaker Studio? Yes, it's right in there.
It comes with a graphic.
Even in the free version of GameMaker Studio, you can build your own graphics in there. Could you even go into Microsoft Paint and paint something that you'd like to use on the screen? Absolutely. So again, it's thinking down different paths and not thinking that there's only one way to do something. There's usually many, many, many different ways to do the same thing.
Yeah.
You just have to challenge yourself to find them. But any other questions before we play the game? I got one in the back. Yeah.
Just a little curious about the game. Like, I was just kind of wondering, do you consider this like a stepping stone for yourselves, or do you think that this will always be something that you'll come back to and be like, we can keep improving it? Or do you
we're gonna update it.
Good question.
That's a great question. We're gonna update it, but I'll tell you, this was definitely a learning project, and we've come so far since we started this a year ago that it's almost. It almost makes us ill to look at the code that we wrote early on, because we look at that and we're like, what the heck were we thinking? We have, so one of the neat things about working with GameMaker Studios, so you can work in a room and you can place an object into that room. The object doesn't have to be an actual object, it's just a call to bring up code. So you can put the object in the room. When this room opens, all this code, all this stuff will happen. So here we're thinking like, all right, well, we'll just create object level controller, and that's going to be everything. Yeah. Well, object level controller in our game is the entire game. Yeah. So it's like the most complicated. I think it's over like 1,000 lines of code, and it's like you look at that now, like why didn't we just do separate objects?
Sound like you know what you're talking about.
Yeah, so we learned a lot, and we are going to take it to the next level. Defender is not done, and actually you're looking at kind of a draft copy of Defender. You're going to notice that some sounds are missing. We haven't got all the way there.
We had to take some features out too, because we did add in most recently like an online posted high score. But we were a little wary of what the internet connection would be like here, so we just kind of took that whole part out. But it's very much a game. I mean, it's the culmination of people learning how to do this from the ground up. And with some of the stuff that we're learning now, does it make sense for us to implement some of these things into this game? Or is it worth us maybe taking another year and building
Do a
a
different
better
game.
game.
That's kind of where we're headed,
Building it
actually.
better.
Yeah, we're already working on game number 2.
Yeah.
Beef fenders in the can. All right,
Kind of.
kind of.
All right.
I don't know what kind of can. But, all right.
So this is an application, right? It's not something that was written on assembly for NES or something like that.
Right.
So
This
yeah,
is an
this
application.
is a standalone application.
Our goal, so we're initially publishing it on Steam, but our goal is to get it on mobile because that was kind of where we had originally thought and conceived of the game.
Yeah.
But Steam is, again, this comes back to the cost factor. If you look into publishing games, Steam is awesome because it's very easy to get on there and it's very cheap. And you might crash and burn because you're going out there with a bunch of other junky games. But
mobile studios tend to be a little bit more expensive.
We looked into that and we decided we're going to start at square one and just see how things go.
Yeah, you guys get an idea when you look at the game. It can translate very well to a mobile screen.
I'm going to take one last question and then we'll get to the game demo because we want to give you guys some time if anyone wants to try the game. There's another panel in here in about 45 minutes. So we've got to get out of here before then, but if you want to see David Kramer and before that, one last question.
Good question. Have you thought about going to like Kickstarter or?
You know what? That's a great question. Yes, we did. We talked about it. We talked about that ad nauseam. And the problem with Kickstarter and those types of tools is crowdsourcing is that you put additional pressure on yourself to create a product. And coming from a background that we have no experience doing this, we didn't want to start there because we didn't want a crowd of people that had given us thousands of dollars to be disappointed if we didn't finish the game or if we never really got to a point that we were going to release it.
Right.
So,
and the other thing too is, no, there is no other thing. You pretty much covered all the points.
yeah, and that's part of the main reason why I used, and Josh used, we used the cheapest possible things we could find.
Cheap.
Cheap. That iPad has a crack in it.
Yeah,
It's 6 inches long.
Yeah.
This is
All right.
all right. So let's play around a beef fender and see how far we
This is actually
get.
going to be, aside from some close co-workers or friends or family of ours, this will be the first. Well, we had a video on YouTube, but nobody really goes on my channel, so. So what's that?
He follows.
You'll
you.
go?
Yeah.
Oh, beautiful.
Josh plays.
Josh plays. Yeah.
He's one of about a
More
million Josh
importantly,
plays on the internet. So good luck finding him.
Facebook.com/BWT Games. That's Josh. That's me.
It's actually J.
Josh plays. No, stop. All right, here we go.
All right.
BWT.
BWT Games.
All right, point hunting at its absolute best. All right. Bam. Where's our audio? Oh, you just wait, brother.
That's Josh's mouth. He popped his cheek.
Yeah, that's Oh, you gotta kill it all. Listen, man.
The format is a
Telling
little
you,
weird because it's not meant for
it's
this
brutal.
screen. It's meant for like widescreen. So this is
It's a very fair question, but you gotta need something to clear the screen.
nothing will make sense in about 5 minutes.
Yeah. We can even get there. I'm getting crushed by my own game.
You have questions now.
No!
Get ready. It's about to go down.
I just put them down.
Yeah, it's a drone counter, so you pick up little bees, and you can set down drones to protect the hive.
We'll show you. Gotta save them. Doesn't save them. Just stay on screen for 30 seconds.
I like hearing that.
Man. Who said that? Because you're playing this next. We'll see what the time is like. I'm telling you guys, it's easy until it's suddenly. Oh, just watch.
Yep.
Here's the thing, too. There's nobody better than me. I played this like 2,000 times.
It's over.
Yeah, you can never possibly
know that way. Maybe some of the secrets we can't quite give away. Oh, it's just an endless place. You survive as long as you can. Yes.
I love these just absolute confusion.
One last time, I promise.
You should make a multiplayer version.
It's been a thought.
What?
I want this kid here. I'm the one over there that said he would be. Are you a PC gamer?
No.
Alright, so
I'm a PC gamer.
Wait, tell me.
Alright, so can I give you a little bit of what's to come though? So we didn't get as far as we wanted to in the game from a gameplay perspective.
Oh, yeah.
What happens in the game even later makes even less sense. The buildings eventually completely disappear because everything burned down, and then you'll see footsteps coming from the background into the front. And then the beehive gets attacked by zombies. And the music turns into heavy metal. And the whole game just goes haywire. So if anyone can make it to zombies, I will be absolutely impressed.
Yeah.
It'll be
eventually, yeah.
Hopefully next month.
We're trying before the end of the year.
Sir, what
Great question. Not really sure.
Right. So if you think about Mario as the basis for some of this information, nothing in Mario makes sense. It's
Doesn't really mean anything.
Poetic.
Just words. They're three letters that roll off the tongue. When we were in high school together, we were in a three-piece jazz band called Project GL. And it's just kind of this weird name thing that, and it doesn't really mean anything, right?
Yep. Spacebar drops a drone, right click drops bomb, left click. When you're ready,
Alright, let's see how easy it is. Now you hold that down, you don't have to click it every time.
You get rid of it.
Oh!
Salaries! Oh! Yeah!
Get the bomb, get the bomb.
Get the power off.
Incredible gameplay. Wow.
Hey, pick those up, those power ups,
Yeah,
man.
get those. That's wrong. Get the wrong. Get the drill. Well, you gotta kill stuff.
Oh no.
Your beehive's falling.
I'm so bad.
Easy. That's right.
I was like, get out of here, punks. Get out of here. Punks. Get out of here, punks.